Okay, looks like we're live. Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, and welcome to United Israel World Union. This is our Sabbath morning study, and it is lovely to be here with you today. I did want to take a minute and greet the fine folks who are gathered in the Onstadt home. I believe that there is a big camp out this weekend, and they're hosting a young or youth retreat there in Mississippi. So they have quite a bit planned, and it looks like they had a good turnout from what I gather. So greetings to those fine folks there. They might be having fun and not boring the children listening to me this morning. But either way, it's good to be here. I did want to make a couple of announcements. I did finish with the initial 5 classes on our Hebrew classes. So in the Introduction to Biblical Hebrew courses, those are uploaded on our site. And I encourage you, if you're at all interested, remotely interested in learning Biblical Hebrew, these 5 classes I think will give you the requisite material so that you can get to the place where you can read Biblical Hebrew. Obviously, there are quite a bit more things that we need to go into to develop grammar and so forth. But I mean, a lot of you don't even know English grammar, so don't worry about that. No, I'm joking. But we will continue to do more classes. We'll do classes, just hadn't announced the next date. But what I didn't want to do was do a class and then wait a few weeks, because believe it or not, my schedule has grown fairly busy, which is sort of interesting. In between doing radio shows and recording and studying and writing and so forth. So I wanted to give it a few weeks off, and then we'll look at a new date to start off, and we'll do things like nouns, subject, verb, agreement, verbs, you know, all that fun stuff that you thought you were through with, some of you longer than others. But anyway, I did want to also mention that the bulletin, if you have not yet signed up for our bulletin, you can do so on the website. There's no charge. You just simply go on, you sign up, and then once a week on Fridays, we send out a bulletin, a United Israel bulletin. We try to capture some of the leading things that are in the news and stuff that's going on at United Israel. So if you're not signed up, please do so. And we just got a new look to the bulletin. They upgraded their service platform, and I think it looks a little bit better. So please do that. A couple of things that I wanted to say thank you for. I got this wonderful book from my friend Sarah. She is the one who also gave us this nice tablecloth. But Sarah heard Jono and I on our weekly show talk about a book by Asaf Avol. It's called A History of the Palestinian People from Ancient Times to the Modern Era. And some of you don't like this sort of political stuff, but it is just jam-packed with empty pages. All right, so this book, I think it was taken down from Amazon because someone said that it was not nice, making fun of the history of the Palestinian people. You get it? Like, there is no history of the Palestinian people. The word Palestine is a word that was applied to the entire region in the Roman times. And so before the formation of the State of Israel, the people who lived there, whether they were Jewish or Arab or Turkish or whoever, they were called Palestinians. In fact, what is now the Jerusalem Post was called the Palestinian Post at that time. So anyway, I won't get into all the politics of the Palestinian people, but thank you, Sarah, for that book. It is now proudly a part of the United Israel Library. And then John and Lyndon got me this cool game. Now, it's I haven't read the rules yet. Thankfully, they're in Hebrew and English. But it's like a Scrabble game, except that the letters are in Hebrew. Now, when Bridget and I first got married, we played Scrabble like all the time because we didn't have anything else to do. And so I remember many fond memories of playing Scrabble, which I still like to play. And I would always be accused of making up words. if I could talk her into playing this with me, I could really do that, and she'd never know. So don't tell her. Actually, thank you very much, though. That looks like fun, and I'm sure we will try this on a game night here at the UI Center. So practice up on your Hebrew, and we have a new game. We are presently working through the triennial Torah portions, as we have been for the last 26, 7, 8 weeks, and we're still in the book of Genesis. We're not but barely over halfway through, but to me, this is where things really begin to get even more exciting than they were in previous weeks. I love this portion. I guess my favorite part of Genesis is as we move into the Joseph saga. We just touched on Joseph last week. We're not quite into that really fun stuff. But right now, we are still in the patriarchal narratives, and we're in the life of Yaakov, the life of Jacob. We're covering today Genesis chapter 31, verse 3, through Genesis 32, verse 2. And so I'm excited about this. I've titled this class, The Return of Jacob, Part 1. And the reason I've called it Part 1 is because today we're only going to cover a portion of the actual return of Jacob. Next week is a crucial part to this class and the story. But it's interesting because for several weeks now, we've been working through a section, a long-running narrative that only now, this week, do we finally reach a white space. Do we finally reach a break in the text? And so I'll take the break when the text takes the break, as the ancients wanted us to, and this might present sort of a cliffhanger. Now, some of you might not be old enough to remember this, but there were certain shows that at the end of them when I was a kid, it would leave you hanging. Like you'd get to that point and it'd say, join us next week or tomorrow or whatever for the conclusion of this exciting episode. So in my best voice, I just told you that. That was my radio voice. So you're going to have a portion of the story today bringing us to the pause in the text, and then we'll pick it up again next week. Now, what that does to me as I teach is I don't like to present a cliffhanger where you don't get substantive classes. So I have to kind of tie up the loose ends or I don't feel right about it. So I think I've got some pretty good content for today's class without giving away everything that comes in next week. The story that I begin today, the return of Jacob, is central to the life of our patriarch Jacob, but it even, in my opinion, goes beyond the life of the patriarch. Now, what do I mean by that? I think that, in my opinion, it's a prophetic picture as well. Now, I've mentioned this before. I don't like to use allusions that aren't really in the text and say, well, this is what it says and it means something much deeper. If you can only have eyes to see, I like going with what it says. But in this text, it says within the text, it kind of tells us that there's more than meets the eye on the surface, that the story goes beyond what's actually told in the story of the patriarch, but not going beyond what's written. Does that make sense? So it goes beyond the story of the life of Jacob, but the clues, if you will, are written in the story itself. I'll show you those as I understand them. Here's something that I wanted to tell you, is that when I talk about the return of Jacob and I allude to the fact that it mentions or that it's a prophetic picture, there is more content in the prophets about the return of Jacob's descendants than any other subject in the prophets. James Tabor and Dennis Jones, two friends of mine, once did a count. In other words, they read through all the prophets in one sitting, and they counted more than 40 separate sections dealing with, some of them quite lengthy, covering chapter after chapter, dealing with the return of Israel, Jacob's descendants. So, now, here's what I'd like to tell you. From the very first word that God says to Jacob, from the first time that God speaks to Jacob, there is a promise of a return to the land of promise from the very first time. In other words, from the very first time that God speaks to Jacob, he's already talking about the return of Jacob. Think about that. So what does that mean to us? We're going to see some of that today. In Genesis chapter 28, now don't ever grow tired of those passages that I cover a lot. If I cover a passage a lot, it means that it's essential. So if you go with me, I'm going to show you something. In Genesis chapter 28, we're going to begin in Genesis 28 today, even though our Torah reading begins in Genesis 31. I'm not going to read it all, so you can relax. You'll get out of here in the next 4 or 5 hours. But in Genesis 28:10, I'd just like to point out that it's at between verse 9 and 10, there's a white space. So over the past several weeks, we've covered one long flowing narrative from Genesis 28:10 all the way through Genesis 32:2, which we'll conclude today. So in Genesis 28:10, Jacob leaves the land. Remember, he's fleeing from his brother. He's going to Padan Aram, and what we see here is the departure. So I would bracket this entire section of text from 28:10 all the way to 32:2 and call it the exile of Jacob, basically. All right? Now think prophetically, because there are clues within this section of text which deal with not only the patriarch, but the descendants of Jacob, in my understanding. Now I want to begin not in 28:10, which just says that Jacob departed, but I want to pick it up in verse 13, because I want to tell you about the word that God first spoke to Jacob, the very first thing he says to him. Verse 13, chapter 28. And behold, Yehovah stood above it. Now he's talking about this ladder, this sulam in Hebrew that Jacob is dreaming. And he sees this ladder with the base of it on the ground at this very special place, with the top of it ascending all the way up into the heavens. And he sees these messengers going up and down in his dream. Now this is what it says. And behold, Yehovah stood above it, the ladder, and said, I am Yehovah, God of Abraham your father, and the God of Yitzhak. The land on which you lie, to you will I give it, and to your seed. And your seed shall be as the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west, and to the east, and to the north, and to the south, and in you and in your seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed. And behold, I am with you, and I will keep you in all places to which you go, and will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done that which I have spoken to you of. And then Jacob awakes. Now, this particular text could be taken, you might argue, that it could be taken as only applying to the patriarch. You know, you could say, well, it doesn't have any prophetic significance. It's just talking about Jacob. You're going to leave. I'm going to be with you. I'm going to bring you back. You're going to have a bunch of kids. It could be talking just about Jacob and to Jacob. But there's something else here. Now, one of the things that, you see, I wasn't going to do this, but now I probably have to. Let me look at something. You guys just talk amongst yourself for just a second. Let me see if I can cover this without giving too much away. That's the way it always happens. Just you start and then you get into it. Okay. Let me go ahead and do this. Go with me to Hosea chapter 12. Hosea 12. I'm going to have to do this again later in the series, but I want to go ahead and give you this. This is like a bonus point. What I want to show you is that in these episodes, in these events that are historical events that happen to the patriarch, that through these, God speaks to the descendants. So Hosea chapter 12. And I just want to begin in verse 4. Talking about Jacob, by the way. It says, he took his brother by the heel in the womb. And by his strength he strove with God. He strove with an angel and prevailed. He wept and made supplication to him. He would find him in Bethel, and there he would speak with us. And there he would speak with us. Now, it's a subtle point. People read over this, but what I want to show you is that when Jacob wrestles with the messenger, which you don't know about yet, right? You don't know the story because we hadn't covered it, so there's no way you could know it. But when he wrestles with him, it says that there he spoke with us. Meaning, it's not just with the patriarch. According to the story, you read the story and it's Jacob and the messenger, and it's just the two of them. But there's something more going on here. So that's my point, is that through these events, it doesn't just apply to Jacob. In fact, back in Genesis chapter 28, it says he's talking to Jacob about, these various things. But notice, if you argue that it could be talking just to Jacob, the wording seems to go beyond the person and life of the patriarch. In fact, I guess point number one that indicates that it's talking to the descendants there, or about the descendants, is it says very clearly, your seed. He doesn't have children yet, not in Genesis 28, but he begins to describe about his children. Now, during the life of the patriarch, how many children does he have? I mean, as far as we know, he has the 12 sons and Dinah. But in this text where God's talking to Jacob in Genesis 28 in the dream, he's referring to your descendants will be many, like the dust of the earth, the stars of the heavens, and so forth. In fact, in 28, he just says the dust of the earth. So, it also suggests that they, the seed of Jacob, will be spread abroad from the west, the east, the north, and the south. See, he's giving Jacob in this initial departure, going into exile, if you will, a story about his seed and how they would be spread throughout the entire earth. You get that? West, east, north, south. Now, that doesn't happen in the life of Jacob. This is going beyond the life of Jacob. Now, it looks forward as well to what I would call declaring a fulfillment of universal blessing. Just like God told Abraham and Isaac, and you will be a blessing to all the families of the earth, he now tells Jacob. But that universal blessing, in many ways, is only manifested itself throughout the ages in part to this point now. In other words, that universal blessing has not totally been manifested in all its fullness, but it will be. In the promise to bring him back, in Genesis 28, he mentions not only that he will be with him, in other words, he says, you're going to go away, and I'll be with you. But notice he says that he will keep Jacob in all the places into which he goes. Now, according to the narrative here, when we're talking about the life of the patriarch, where does he go? Padan Aram. Like, I'm going to keep you in all the places you go, like Padan Aram, like there and back. Or does he imply, I'm talking about your seed, and how your seed will be scattered west, east, north, and south, and I will go with you. In Ezekiel, it talks about how Jehovah will be for a little sanctuary for his descendants, no matter where they're scattered, right? So the idea that God is with us, no matter where we go, is a very important concept in the biblical stories. So this, I think, is yet another clue that it's talking beyond the life of the patriarch, not merely that he'll be with him in Padan Aram, there and back, but he'll be with him in all the places to which he goes. And then, look, he says this, and I will bring you back to this land. You want to have some fun in the prophets? Look up how many references, the wording will be slightly different, but look up how many references it says, and I will bring you back to this land, this place. So think about that. A lot of the Bible is written outside the land of Israel or written to an audience who's outside the land of Israel. I had a very well-meaning friend one time who said, if the Torah is not being taught from the land of Israel, it's not authentic. Watch this. That's not true. Let me tell you this. Let me add to my comment. The Torah wasn't even written in Israel. I mean, think about it. It was written according to the narrative and according to tradition. It's written outside the land of Israel. Now, modern academic scholarship will argue that some of it was written way later, and you can read all those books. I have. But here's the thing. According to the biblical narrative and according to tradition, the story of the Torah takes place outside the land, not in Israel. And so therefore, it's worded in such a way. Remember, it ends and they're standing on the lip of the land of promise. Moses is dying, or he dies. They're not even in the land. You have to get into Joshua to read about the conquest of the land. So what's my point? The prophets will often talk to an audience who are not in the land, and I will bring you back, and I will establish you, and I will make you great, and I will multiply you, and I will bless you. How many prophecies do we have like that? Remember, Jeremiah chapter 32, verse 36 through 41 is this incredible promise where God says that the one thing that Jehovah will do with all his heart and all his soul, says, I will bring you back from all the places where you've been scattered, and I will plant you in this land with all my heart and all my soul. Now, who's he talking? He's not talking to a group in the land. He says, I'm going to bring you back. Isaiah chapter 11, and it will bring back the exiles from all these places into which they've been scattered. He will extend his hand a second time, Isaiah 11 said, and to those who are in Assyria and Egypt, meaning those who were exiled in the former exiles. Okay, so the point is that when God says, I will bring you back to this land when he departs in Genesis 28, he is talking to Jacob. But he's speaking to Jacob, through Jacob, to Jacob's descendants who are alive and well today. Remember when the Torah is given in Torah reading Nitzavim, it says this. It says, interestingly enough, that the Torah that I am speaking to you now is, now I'm not just talking to those who are here with us today, but to those who are not standing. Like, what does that mean? He's talking to the descendants. So the reason I brought in Hosea chapter 12, just to put that in there, is that it's very clear evidence that the prophets saw that when God speaks to the patriarchs, he's often speaking to us. All right. So today, as we read the portion of Scripture that we're going to read, I want you to listen and look for details that might shed light on another return of Jacob, a return of Jacob that is yet to come, about which the prophets have much to say, and about which Jehovah has much to say. A return of Jacob's descendants from all the places into which they've been scattered. Deuteronomy, as you know, I'll often tell people, Deuteronomy and Jeremiah are my favorite books. Deuteronomy makes it very clear. Though you've been scattered to the farthest ends of heaven, from there I will bring you back. Deuteronomy 30, same thing. It says, when you return to your heart, when all these things happen to you, the blessings and the curse, in all the nations into which you've been scattered, when you return to your heart, I will from there bring you back. So that's the point. Now, let's read the reading. It comes from Genesis chapter 31:3. These, by the way, are posted on our Facebook group page. And then I also upload them when I upload the class so that you have them attached to the teaching. They're from the Transparent English Bible. Very literal. You can follow along. If you have the translation, if you don't use any translation, just realize that this is a very literal version. Genesis 31:3, and Jehovah said toward Jacob, return toward the land of your fathers and to those brought forth of yours, and I'll be with you. Jacob sent and called to Rachel and to Leah the field toward his flock, and he said to them, I see the face of your father, for it's not toward me as yesterday and a third. And Elohim of my father has been with me, and you yourselves know that with all my might I've served your father, and your father caused mocking with me and changed my wage 10 times. And Elohim has not given him to cause bad with me. And if he spoke thus, the speckled are your wage, and all the flock brought forth speckled ones. And if he spoke thus, the striped are your wage, and all the flock brought forth striped. And as Elohim caused to be torn away the acquired livestock of your father, and given to me. And it was at the time of the heating of the flock, and I lifted my eyes and saw in a dream, and look, the male goats that were going up upon the flock were striped, speckled, and spotted. And he said toward me, the agent of Elohim in the dream, Yaakov, and I said, look, it's me. And he said, lift, please, your eyes and see. All the male goats which are going up upon the flock are striped, speckled, and spotted. For I have seen all that Lavan is doing to you. I am the El of Bethel, to whom you anointed there a positioned pillar, and to whom you vowed there to me a vow. Now, rise, go out of this land, and return toward the land of those brought forth of yours. And Rachel answered and Leah and said to him, is there still to us a division and inheritance in the house of our father? Have we not been thought as foreigners by him? For he sold us. Interesting that they would say it like that. Like we always read that and you go, well, that's the custom. They're like kind of upset about this. I'm sorry, it just hits me every time I read it. For he sold us, and eating, he has surely also eaten our silver. For all the richness that Elohim has caused to be torn away from our father, to us is this and to our sons. And now all that Elohim has said toward you, do. Jacob rose and lifted his sons and his women upon the camels. And he drove all his acquired livestock and all his gathered property that he gathered, acquired livestock of his acquiring, that he had gathered in Padan Aram, to come toward Isaac his father, toward the land of Canaan. By the way, remember, it's been like 20 years, and last time we saw Isaac, we thought he was on his deathbed. And Laban walked to shear his flock, and Rachel stole the teraphim that were to her father. Jacob stole the heart of Laban the Aramean, upon lack of telling to him that he was fleeing. He fled, he and all that was to him, and rose and passed over the river and placed his face toward the mountain of Gilead. And it was told to Laban on the third day that Jacob had fled, and he took his brothers with him and pursued after him a way of 7 days, and caused to join him in the mountain of Gilead. And Elohim came toward Laban the Aramean in the dream of the night, and said to him, Be guarded to yourself, lest you speak with Jacob from good unto bad. Laban caused to reach Jacob, and Jacob had clapped his tent in the mountain, and Laban had clapped with his brother in the mountain of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, What have you done? You've stolen my heart, driven my daughters as those being captured of the sword. And why have you been hidden to flee and stolen me, and not told to me, and I might send you with joy and with songs, with timbrel and with lyre? And you did not permit me to kiss my sons and my daughters. Now you've caused foolishness in so doing. There is my hand to El to do with you bad. But Elohim of your father last night spoke toward me, saying, Be guarded to yourself from speaking with Jacob from good unto bad. And now, walking you've surely walked, because longing for you have surely longed for the house of your father. Why did you steal my Elohim? Jacob answered and said to Laban, Because I feared, for I said, Lest you tear off your daughters from me, with whomever you find your Elohim, he will not live. Before our brothers recognize for yourself what is with me, and take to yourself, for Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. And Laban came in the tent of Jacob, and in the tent of Leah, in the tent of the two house servants, and he did not find them. And he went out from the tent of Leah and came to the tent of Rachel. Rachel had taken the teraphim and placed them in the saddlebag of the camel, and she sat on them. Laban felt all the tent and did not find them, and she said toward her father, Let it not burn in the eyes of my master, that I am not able to rise from before your face, for the way of women is to me. And he searched, and he did not find the teraphim. Jacob burned, and he contended with Laban. And Jacob answered and said to Laban, What is my rebellion? What is my error that you have been hot after me? You felt all my items. What have you found of all the things of your house? Place it thus before my brothers and your brothers, and they will cause judgment between us both. These 20 years I was with you. Your ewes and your female goats were not childless, and the rams of your flock I've not eaten. The torn I did not cause to come toward you. I count it error. From my hand you sought it, stolen by day or stolen by night. I was thus in the day drought ate me, the frost at night, sleep fled from my eyes. This is to me 20 years in your house. I served you 4 and 10 years for your 2 daughters, 6 years for your flock, and you changed my wage 10 times. Unless the Elohim of my father, the Elohim of Abraham, and the dread of Isaac had been to me, surely now empty you would send me away. My lowness and the labor of my 2 palms Elohim has seen, and he caused you to be judged last night. And Laban answered and said toward Jacob, The daughters are my daughters. The sons are my sons. The flocks are my flocks, and all that you see it is to me. And to my daughters, what will I do to these today? And to their sons that they have brought forth, and now walk. Let us cut a pact, I and you, and let it be for a witness between me and between you. And Jacob took a stone and lifted it up for a positioned pillar. Jacob said to his brothers, Gather stones, and they took stones and made a heap, and they ate there on the heap. And Laban called it Yeger Sahada, you'd think I'd know how to read this word, Sahaduta, thank you very much. And Jacob called it Gilead. Laban said, this heap is witness between me and between you today. Therefore he called its name Gilead, and the watchtower, for he said, may Jehovah watch between me and between you when we are hidden, a man from his fellow. If you afflict my daughters, and if you take women upon my daughters, there is no man with us. See, Elohim is witness between you and between me. And Laban said to Jacob, look, this heap, and look, the position pillar that I have thrown between you and between me. A witness is this heap. And a witness is a position pillar, that I do not pass over this heap toward you, and that you do not pass over toward me this heap and this position pillar for bad. The Elohim of Abraham and the Elohim of Nahor will judge between us, the Elohim of their father. And Jacob swore by the dread of his father Isaac. Jacob slaughtered a slaughtered thing in the mountain, and called to his brothers to eat bread. They ate bread and lodged in the mountain. And Laban shouldered up in the morning and kissed his sons and his daughters and blessed them. And Laban walked and returned to his place. And Jacob walked on his way, and the messengers of Elohim encountered him. And Jacob said, as he saw them, this is the camp of Elohim. He called the name of that place Mahanaim. Long reading. It's a long story, and it is full. Accusations of theft abound. You know, it's one of the key words in this particular story. Rachel stole the idols. Laban feels as though Jacob has stolen his family. Jacob says that Laban has stolen 20 years of his life. Everybody's talking about somebody stole something. Accusations are flying. This particular reading does have a lot more in it, though, other than theft and accusations of theft, because you might argue, depending on your angle, who's really stealing from whom, or if anybody's stealing. Laban is convinced, look, everything at your camp is mine. Remember, the girls, they said, our dad sold us away and took all our money, basically. So you get the impression from reading this story that things had sort of degraded in the relationship before he left. Let me tell you something about Jacob. When Jacob leaves, it's time for Jacob to move. He wears out his welcome. I notice this now in almost every story. By the time he's gone, it's time for him to be gone. It has gotten to that place. Let me tell you something else. I think prophetically, when Jacob leaves, it's time for Jacob to leave prophetically. I think Jacob will have worn out his welcome. I think people will be so fed up. I think it'll be pretty obvious. But our story begins with a clear call from Jehovah announcing to Jacob that the time has come to return. So think about that. He evidently, we read this and we talked about it last week a little bit too. Jacob is told, go home. Return to the land of your fathers. Remember, he's not going to let him go out empty, so he's got to do this the flock thing first. But when he's told, get ready, Jacob, in other words, Jacob doesn't just get up one morning and say, I'm going to make Aliyah, I'm going to go back to the land of my fathers. God tells him. He knows it. There's no doubt. It's not like a feeling, like, I kind of feel like I should, because I have that feeling. Like I think, it'd be nice to make Aliyah and go to Israel. I mean, I can't because of other things. But when the timing is right, I think prophetically, the events of the day will match what is required by the prophets, if that makes sense. Jacob has to convince his women. In other words, he doesn't just leave. I actually have had conversations with people over the past, I don't know, however many years I've been doing this, where people sometimes in this quote-unquote Torah faith movement will say, my spouse is just not with me on this. And it generally, a lot of times, what they are getting ready to tell me is, I just don't know if we're going to make it. Right? There are cases where the husband and the wife aren't on the same team with all this. And I never say, well, that sounds like a pretty good idea. What I usually say is, look, I understand that sometimes separations come. I get that. Hey, it happens. But when it comes to this, Jacob sets forward a very good case that it's the right thing to do. And they hear him, and it makes sense. And they're like, you know what? You're right. Do whatever it is that God's telling you to do. I think this is the ideal picture, right? It's not, ladies, I need to go back. God told me to go back, and I need to move to the land of my fathers. And if they would have said, well, that's crazy. We're not going there. We have it nice here. He'd say, okay, well, I'm going to have to ask for a divorce then, right? The point is that when the timing is right, I don't know that the women would have agreed to go if it wasn't obvious. It's obvious. When the time is right, it's obvious. You get that? Okay. Now, look at verse 13. Genesis 31:13. And it says, now this is the word that God gives to Jacob. I am the God of Bethel. Remember in Hosea 12 it says there he spoke with us? I am the God of Bethel, where you did anoint a pillar, which, by the way, this is the first occurrence of the word anoint. All right? And where you did vow a vow to me, now arise, get out of this land, and return to the land of your birth. Could it be any clearer? Calls him, he said, I'm the one. I'm the God of Bethel, where you anointed that pillar. Jacob goes, oh yeah, I remember. Yeah. He goes, okay. Because has he talked to him since then? It's certainly not on a daily basis. He doesn't, as it says, he wakens my ear day by day. It's not like he's having an ongoing dialogue with the Creator, but it's been a while. Remember when you anointed that pillar? Okay. Well, that's 20 years ago. And he says, get up, get out of this land, and return to the land of your birth. So, very clear message. These are important points. Very clear message from God. Not like your everyday, I kind of feel like God's talking to me kind of thing. Jacob probably had those too. He probably had nudges. He knows that God's guiding thing. But this is different. You see the difference? What he heard back then, what he hears now, this is a different kind of hearing the voice kind of thing. So when he gets this clear message, convinces his women, he gets up and he packs up. But so do the women. Now, they pack up more than what he thinks they packed up. Right? This is pretty important. Again, I love the girls. I love Rachel and Leah. But Rachel. That girl. There's something about Rachel. She's beautiful. But, man, every time I read, like, the story of Rachel, I see things that I go, Jacob is taken by the beauty, but she's got some habits here. He's married to someone who likes these little idols. Look at verse 19, 31. Laban goes out to shear his sheep. And then it just quickly tells us this. And Rachel stole the idols or the images, the teraphim, that belonged to her father. Picture this. All right, ladies, I'll see you. I'm going to go shear the sheep. Soon as he's cleared the door, she's like, I got to get those idols because we're going to leave. So she steals the idols. Now, I'm sure that there are midrash and stories that probably, no, I shouldn't say that. There are probably stories in various forms where people try to excuse this. I'm not. She takes some false gods, some statues, figurines that you worship, and she stashes them to steal them. Bottom line, Laban hears that they left. He gets word. They tell you, your whole family's gone. So he gathers up some friends and family to chase them down. He's hot. He's hot. He goes after, running after them, chasing them down. On the way, he's warned in a dream. Be careful with that group, right? Now, I go through this a lot in the patriarchal narratives, but go with me again to Psalm 105, because I want to show you whenever I see these warnings to people not to harm Israel, it's important to bring this up, because this is what the psalmist is talking about. Psalm 105, let's begin in verse 8. 105, verse 8. He's remembered his covenant forever, the word which he commanded to 1,000 generations, which he made with Abraham, and his oath to Isaac, and confirmed the same to Jacob for a law, and to Israel for an everlasting covenant, saying, to you I will give the land of Canaan, the lot of your inheritance, when they were but a few men in number, of little account, and sojourners there. When they went from one nation to another, from one kingdom to another people, he suffered no man to do them any wrong, but reproved kings for their sake, saying, touch not my anointed, and do my prophets no harm. Touch not my messiahs, and to my prophets no you shall harm them. So what he's saying, whenever they were just a few in number, like a patriarch and his family, and they would travel from one country to another, and people were like, I'm going to get those Israelites, I'm going to get those children. God would come to them in a dream, whether it's Abimelech or a king or whoever, or Laban. Say, he tells Laban, don't even speak to him, for good or for bad. In other words, you better be very, very careful when it comes to Jacob. And you know what's still the case? You better be very careful when it comes to Jacob. Laban does catch up, and he lets him have it. He's still mad. Now, he's been warned, but he's got to let it out. There's a lot of coming out. There's a lot of people getting stuff off the chest in this one, And we can read over it, but I mean, if you think about it, in chapter 31, verse 29, this is interesting. Okay, yeah, look at verse 29. It is in the power of my hand to do you hurt. Now I want to picture it. I could hurt you. It's not like I just read. It's in the power of my hand. He's like, I could hurt you. You understand that, boy? But the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, take thou heed that you speak not to Jacob either good or bad. And now, though you would needs be gone, because you do long after your father's house, he said, I get it. I understand you had to leave because you got to get back to your father's house. But why have you stolen my gods? I mean, he's like, I get it. I mean, I don't want you, I could hurt you. I don't want, but the gods, Jacob? Now, here's what's interesting. Watch Jacob's response. Watch how he, look at the next. And Jacob answered and said to Laban, because I was afraid. Now, wait a minute. Hold on. He just asked him, I understand you leaving. Why the gods? Jacob says, because I was afraid. Now, watch this, though. Is he answering the question, why did you take my gods? No. Watch. Because I was afraid, for I said, perhaps you would take by force your daughters from me. Anyone with whom you find your gods, let him not live before our brethren discern that you what is yours with me and take it from you. Now, for Jacob knew not that Rachel had stolen them. Here's the way I think this goes down. He begins to answer, he's answering the first part. Why did you leave? It's like, I thought if I didn't do it the way I did, you wouldn't have let the girls go. You wouldn't have let me take my kids. You've already told him everything is his. So he had to do it the way he did it. And then it's like he went, what? Your gods? I tell you what, Laban, whoever, if you find anything that's yours in my stuff, you come put it right here. Can you imagine in the background, Rachel's like, oh, Lord, I got to hide them gods. Right? I mean, she does hear it. She's got to hear it because she puts this scheme together real quick. Because Jacob is out there talking smack. I tell you, you go look through all my, help yourself. And when you bring it right here, I'll wait. And sure enough, boy, he goes to digging and he's digging through and says the way that the Hebrew puts it, he's like, you've touched all my stuff. He's feeling. It says he's feeling. You can picture him. He's like he's going through bags. He's emptying stuff out. He goes in Leah's tent. He's checking. He's looking, peeling up covers, looking under clothing, looking everywhere. He gets to Rachel's and she's just like sitting on a camel. You know, don't mind me. This is what the story tells us. She's put him in a bag on the camel, and she says, don't bother me, I can't get up, right? The way of women. We'll get to that in a minute. Laban doesn't find the idols. Rachel stole the idols, hid the idols. Jacob doesn't know about them. He hears for the first time about idols from Laban. She sits on them, lies. Well, I assume. I don't know if the way of women was on her, but she uses that as an excuse to why she can't get out. The whole point is she's come up with a way to hide idols in her stuff. It's been 20 years since Jacob first went to Padan Aram. He makes it very clear. Everybody's unloading here. Laban unloads on him. You left, you stole everything that belonged to me. I didn't even get to kiss the babies. He's mad. Jacob's truthful now. Everybody's coming out with it. Jacob said, let me tell you, I worked for you 14 years for these two women, 6 years for the flock. Nobody had a miscarriage. I took care. I did that. I never took a thing, and you're going to chase me down. It's a truth. Come to truth meeting, right? Now, this is a come to Jacob meeting. Jacob showed up all alone. Look at verse 41. Thus I've been 20 years in your house. I served 14 years for your 2 daughters, 6 for your cattle, and you've changed my wages 10 times. He goes on to say, if it wasn't for God looking out for me, I'd have left your place empty, just like I arrived. So he gives due. I mean, he looks to God and says very clearly that God took care of him. But it was God that took care of him. He wants that clear. He's not leaving empty-handed, but it was only because of God. Remember the whole dream that he had about that wasn't his idea. God told him, have you noticed the sheep? Look at this. So they make a covenant. Our story, 20 years after Jacob set out on his journey, ends similarly to the way it began. Look at chapter 32, verse 1. And Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. And when Jacob saw this, or them, he said, this is God's camp. He called the name of that place Mahanaim. Now, in most of your English translations, does it say Mahanaim? Yeah, I love that word. It means the twin camps. Now, this is why you have to listen in next week, because I am going to be, next week, I'm not through yet. I got some more stuff to cover. Next week is probably one of my most insightful messages, I think, because it deals with the twin camps. We're going to talk more about that next week. But there's a white space. The last word you get before a major break in the text is Mahanaim. He's at the place where he's about to come back in the land, and he says he encounters angels of God, and he says this place is called two camps. Two camps. We're talking about Jacob. We're talking about prophetic allusions here. Now, here's what I want you to think about. I told you from 28:10, Genesis 28:10 to 32:2, that entire section represents Israel outside the land. It begins with messengers of Jehovah and a promise that he'll be with him. It ends with, I'm going to bring you back, and messengers of Jehovah. It's like Jacob's story is that he has been protected during his journey, and he's ushered out and welcomed into the land by angels, if you will. Now, here's the way I think sometimes. If the land in some way, when I think of the land, the Holy Land, that special place, I always think about the Garden of Eden, which is guarded by these messengers in a way. They're cheruvim to Korav. The idea is that it's guarded, the way is guarded. So in my mind, I make the association, at least, between this special place that God has set apart for his people to go out and to come in is guarded by messengers. Whenever in Genesis 28, back to the original, to the departure, in 28:12, he dreams the ladder set up on the earth, the top reached the heavens, and behold, the messengers of God ascending and descending, and then Jehovah is up at the top. Notice what he says in verse 16. After he wakes up, it says, and Yaakov awoke out of his sleep, and he said, surely Jehovah is in this place, and I didn't know it. He was afraid and said, how dreadful is this place? This is none other than the house of God, Bethel, and this is the gate of heaven. So he interprets the presence of messengers to mean that this place is very, very holy and set apart. So whenever we look at the ending that we just concluded with at the end of 32, once again at a crucial point in Jacob's life, messengers meet him. He says this, he calls it this time, this place is Machne Elohim, the camp of Elohim. And then he calls it Mahanaim. Finally, we've reached the break. The long narrative that began in 28:10, it begins with Jacob on his way, Vayetze Yaakov, and Jacob went forth, and it concludes V'Yaakov halak l'doracho. Jacob walked on to his way. To his way. So he goes forth, it says he goes forth, and then he's walking towards his way. He's going back to the place he's destined to be. He's going back to the place that he will inherit and his seed will inherit. He calls the place Mahanaim, 2 camps. This will prove prophetic in next week's class. I don't want to go into it too much, but here's some thoughts as I close. I want to leave you hanging with what is it that you would see prophetically associated with Mahanaim, the 2 camps. It has to do with Jacob's prayer. He reveals more than just patriarchal character, Jacob's words. I think he speaks on behalf of his descendants. So we'll talk more about in part 2 about Mahanaim. But think about these. He's been away from the land for a long time. 20 years. Pretty long time. He didn't leave until the right time. He could have left. Obviously, he was frustrated. He was frustrated when when Laban tricked him with the women thing. He was frustrated when his wages were changed 10 times. He could have left. He wanted to leave, I'm sure. He couldn't leave. Why couldn't he leave? Wasn't the right time. He didn't hear from God to leave, and he had to make sure that the women were on his side. You know, that idol packing wife of his, to make sure she was bought in. And he couldn't leave empty-handed. See, that's one of the rules with Jacob. When Jacob leaves, it's time for Jacob to leave. He's usually got somebody hot on his heels, but he's got to do it at the right time. It's time for Jacob to leave. He's going to hear that it's time to leave. And then of all other things, think about this. God does not let Jacob leave empty-handed. He doesn't let it happen here. He tells him a dream about how to multiply his flocks, which happens. And it's not going to happen to the children of Israel when they leave Egypt either. He followed God's word. When God spoke to him, he makes sure that his family is on board and they leave. Please note, think about this as we close today's class. There are idols in the camp of Jacob. Now, in the story, it's Rachel, but I'm going to expand that a little bit. We don't read that Leah has them. We do read that Rachel has them. But here's what I would say. If this is a prophetic picture, which I believe it is, and I will talk about this more next week, excuse me, Rachel represents more than a wife of Jacob. I believe that this very day, the camp of Israel, who have been called to come back, I believe there are idols in that camp. Now, here's what I don't want to do. I don't want to sugarcoat and suggest that these are innocent little figurines that belong to Daddy. I don't want to suggest that Rachel isn't bowing to these idols. I mean, I don't know who all was. But one thing about these ancient teraphim, they were worshipped. Now, in next week's class, we're going to see something very interesting about this. Jacob didn't know that she had them. As far as the story goes, he didn't know. But I believe, and I close with this, I believe that those descendants today, Jeremiah talks about Rachel's descendants coming back, says, stop your voice from weeping. Your sons will come from far. I believe that initially they have idols with them. Now we have to think about that. We have to search our hearts and make sure that there are no idols in the camp as we begin to return to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So join us next week for the exciting conclusion to Jacob's return home. Stay tuned, and we'll go into a little break, and then we'll come back. You'll see a link. We'll come back with a dialogue session. So, Shabbat Shalom. Shavua Tov.